Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Nicholas Nickleby review miniseries. This is our final episode. We have made it 9 episodes in, and we have now have finished the play, and we will now be doing a cumulative summary and experience of this adventure in this very episode. So if you've been skipping episodes, you can now skip to this one and you'll get all the stuff you kind of missed. But here we go. We are back. I'm once again joined by my very dandily dressed Mr. Ryan Borochovitz. Hello, Ryan.
Hello, Mac. You're one to talk. Look at you, daintily dressed as well.
I try. It's the final episode. We
It's the
gotta look
final
good.
episode, and I figured if all Newman Noggs can get to wear a fancy suit at the end, so could I. So that
There you
was.
go.
Then again, it is still COVID, so I am wearing sweatpants from the waist
As
down.
am I.
Yeah.
Well, Ryan, let's dive into this
But
final
first, what's in your
installment.
cup?
Oh my goodness, right. Well, in honor of all the very Les Mizzy things that happened in this episode, there is
There you
the
go.
official Les Mis mug.
Oh, trust me, we're gonna check in about that a little later.
Better believe it.
Well, I just
How
have
about
my
you?
regular the cup with orange pico tea because why mess with a good thing this close to the finish line?
Very good. Well, I have my Earl Grey tea.
Cheers.
Mm. Cheers, Mr. Lilyvic.
We'll talk about Mr. Lilyvic, even though he's not in this
Absolutely.
episode, thankfully, but
He
we'll
is
talk
not.
about why that is
Yes.
still a problem, even though I'm happy he's not here. All
Very
right.
true. Well, let's dive in. Give us a quick summary, Ryan, of what happened in the last episode. Elevator pitch it.
Yeah, so last episode was kind of defined by three big high drama moments.
Mm-hmm.
The first one was the duel that takes place between Lord Frederick and Sir Mulberry Hawk, in which Hawk shoots Frederick. He's dead, but because he owed a lot of money to Ralph that now dies with him, Ralph is screwed financially, as are all of his co-conspirators, you could call them, including Sir Mulberry Hawk. So
Yeah.
deliberately dying in this duel was a strategic move by Lord Frederick to destroy all of his enemies at once.
True.
And yeah, that was kind of the last we see of Hawk. Then we have
Hawk flees the country.
Yes. Then we have the Thwarted Wedding, which is, as we know, Mr. Gride, aka the Goblin, was planning to extort a marriage out of poor Madeline.
Yes.
And
Madeline Bray.
Madeline Bray. And yeah, so Nicholas and Kate crash the wedding to be like, this is preposterous. But then, during all the commotion, which Mr. Hawk also crashes, but we don't need to really get into that. Mr. Bray dies suddenly, and
well, he was sickly anyway.
He was sickly, yes. So I guess all the commotion was too much for him, and yeah. So then Bray's death means that Madeline can back out of the wedding because she was only doing it to save her father, and now it's too late for that.
Mm-hmm.
So then, and that kind of was, punctuated by, oh no, the deed that says that Madeline actually has all of this money that'll become hers when she gets married, that the goblin had in his possession was stolen by his
housekeeper,
landlady, girlfriend, hard to say.
Peg.
Peg. So yes, Peg's made off with it, and oh no, they're ruined unless they can find it. And Ralph had tasked Mr. Squeers with being the one to find it. And then the kind of final big drama event of the previous episode was the death of poor old Smike, who
consumption got him.
Yeah, he had his tuberculosis, big sad finale, and they took him back to their family farm.
Come to me.
Yes. And, as you do with a poor, sick dog, you take him to the farm upstate where he can run around and play with all the other dogs. And yeah, Smike is no longer with us in a big, sad, dramatic climax. Now, which brings us to the final episode, which kind of, I would say, exists in sort of 3 parts, really 2, but a sort of disconnected prologue bit.
Yes.
So we open and I named all these parts because why not? Right. We open with part 1 that I'll call The Sting. And this is our little prologue sequence where we're with Mr. Squeers, who has tracked down Peg, and he's slowly trying to work his charm magic to get her to give him the deed, which is pretty easy because he just sort of tempts her with alcohol, and that kind of does the trick. he, gives Peg a few drinks, and she's very happy for the drinks, and he like promises to give gossip about how Gride's wedding was a disaster, which she loves to hear because she hates him.
Yeah.
And through this sort of transaction of gossip and drink, Squeers manages to get a hold of the deed, and he's like smacking Peg away, like, haha, I got what I want, I'm gonna run away. When there's suddenly a knock at the door, and who is it? Why, it's old Newman Noggs and Frank Cheruble, and they brought the constable with them. And the coppers, they're like, this is a raid, and they, do the whole kind of like, shakedown, getting what they want. But Squeers tries to make a run for it, and he's running across the balcony, and he's, doing all this thing. But suddenly, just as he thinks he got away, Newman Noggs hits him in the head with what looked to me like some kind of like big metal tray. I don't know what was it in the book. We can skip ahead just to this portion of the adaptation check-in.
I'm currently scrolling through my chapter notes to see what it was. Yeah, it just says that Noggs hits him in the head.
So no instrument or like blunt or musical is listed. So first of all, I think, well, to me, I think it would have been more like, more like symbolically rich if he just punched him instead of hitting him with an object in the back of the head. Because one, that's what Nicholas always does, and Noggs loves him some Nicholas. So like that, if that's the lesson he learns from his good friend, that sometimes you just need to solve your problem with your fist. And two, because he's always cracking his knuckles, and he periodically did like the fake air punching.
Wait, sorry. Newman raised the bellows again. So
the
something
bellows.
The bellows.
Okay.
So I don't know what bellows are.
Well, I think it's like is it the thing that like puffs in the fireplace?
Oh,
like...
yes, correct. Okay. Yes, it's the puffy thing that in the fire. So it hits him with that in the head.
Well, I still think, getting back to what I was saying, I still think he should have punched him. One, because that's what Nicholas would do. And two, because he's always cracking his knuckles and mind punching the air, pretending what he wants to do to Ralph. It would be pretty fun if he just finally, those fists were put to use. But no, whatever. We'll hit him with a prop of sorts.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so good old, and this obviously elicited big cheers from the audience that not only does Squeers get his comeuppance, but that it's Noggs who delivers this sort of fatal blow. But not fatal, because Squeers will be just fine. Yeah. But wait till you hear what happens to him later.
I know. Thus ends the sting.
Thus ends the sting. So then this next sort of like multi-part section, but I'll consider it all one continuous thing, I'm calling Ralph's Progress. Of like a la Pilgrim's Progress. I
was gonna say, shouldn't it be more called Ralph's Descent?
It's his descent into hell, but I think this is sort of the fine. Ralph's Inferno. Why don't we?
Sure.
Sure. So Ralph is alone, lamenting his sleeplessness in a soliloquy. He calls for Noggs, but gets no response. Then a letter arrives, and we don't know right away who it's from, but we later find out it's from the Cherubles, and it's saying that there's dreadful news. The matter have come to light. It will not be good for you. So then a Greek chorus goes on about how Ralph is taking to the streets. First, he goes to Snolly's house. And very good casting, I'll say here, because Mrs. Snolly answers the door, and she's played by Janet Dale, who we've seen in like a number of roles previously. But one of them was as one of the two Snolly boys at the Yorkshire school. So very good casting choice there to have, I see the family resemblance with you and your mother. It's like, well done there. So yeah, Janet Dale playing Mrs. Snolly answers the door, and she says, my husband isn't going to talk to you, and, he wants nothing to do with you. And so get lost. So that doesn't work. So then Ralph goes on to visit his good friend, Mr. Goblin Gride, and who likewise, at least he answers his own door, but he shoos him away and says, it's not safe, get out of here. So Ralph is very perplexed at these men who, quote, used to lick the dust off my feet, and, quote, are now rejecting him. I guess this is what happens when, your Breaking Bad-esque meth empire is crumbling. He doesn't have his money anymore. The end is looming. He's clearly doesn't have the same power that he used to.
He is becoming disheveled.
So then on his third trip on this, like, Pilgrim's Progress, he goes to looking for Squeers and Peg. And, a young woman answers the door and says that, oh, they're not here. They were taken by the constable to the police office. He's like, where is the police office? He's like, well, that I can tell you because I'm poor and therefore I've certainly been arrested before. So the young lady takes him to the police office where Squeers is all tied up.
Mm-hmm.
And so when Ralph gets there, yeah, so Squeers is very drunk, first of all.
Yes.
And yeah, he is not having Ralph's kind of like fake friendship camaraderie. He's like telling him right away that I will do whatever I need to do to like lessen my sentence, and if that means flipping on you, so be it. What are you gonna do? You can't afford to pay me. You can't pay me off. If they send me to some dark continent, and we'll talk about which one in a minute. If they send me to some dark exotic continent, what will your money do for me there? So yeah, screw you, Ralph, you can't help me anymore, and so I will do what I have to survive.
That is true.
So in his desperation, Ralph visits the Cherubles, this is when we find out that they were the ones who sent the letter, and they kind of do like a bit of a Jerry Springer, Maury Povich sort of, and look at all the people we've assembled to see you here on live television. Because
surprise!
Who do they have? Well, first of all, they have Mr. Noggs, and Ralph laughs, ha ha ha, yes, the spineless twit is a liar, and of course he's working with you, but you can't trust anything he says. And
he's a drunk.
Yes, a drunk and a liar. And as if like this is kind of, as much as there's a lot going on with a lot of characters in the, to me this feels like the Noggs episode, because he gets a lot of big moments in this one. He's already had this big moment of physical violence, and here he finally gets to tell Ralph everything he's been thinking all these years. How if I'm drunk, it's because, you work me to the bone, which I've been nothing but loyal to you because I had to, because I'm poor. And if I'm a liar, if I'm such a liar, then why wasn't I your favorite? You love liars. Oh, burn. So yeah, so good old Newman Noggs gets to say what's finally been on his mind. And then, the Charitables reveal that they knew all about the deed and how the goblin had required it, and that it is now safely in police custody, and that Snolly has already flipped on Ralph, so there's no chance of anything.
Yeah.
And then they inform him that Smike has died, which makes Ralph laugh with joy. In fact, this is wonderful news, because I don't care for Smike at all, nor do I have any reason to. In fact, I love that
it's his Green Goblin moment.
Yes, I love that he's dead, because that means Nicholas is sad, and I do hate my nephew. But he's going to eat those words in just a second, because the next big reveal of who else is behind curtain number 2, why, it's the beggar from earlier, Mr. Brooker, I believe his name was.
Brooker, yeah.
And he comes in and reveals the big spoiler that we've refrained from talking about this whole time, that Smike is Ralph's son. You are the father. So Ralph's, cheery demeanor immediately goes, what? And Mr. Brooker tells the story about how, one of the many people that Ralph was financially exploiting through debts had a lovely daughter who couldn't believe that the then handsome and young Ralph Nickleby was the source of their family's reunion, and she thought he was their savior, so she married him in secret, and they had a child. But then when he was busy with his business and was neglecting his family more, the lady ran away and left the son behind. So when Ralph sent Mr. Brooker, his then clerk, to retrieve the boy, Mr. Brooker realized that this was not good, so he told Ralph that little baby Smike was dead, who wasn't named Smike back then. Mr. Brooker was the one who named him Smike, and he instead took him to the Yorkshire school, where he visited him for a while, but then when he wasn't able to keep up the payments, he eventually had to just leave him there.
It was because Ralph sent Brooker to prison.
Yes. Right, I forgot about that detail. You're right, because Ralph sent Brooker to prison, as we learned about in a previous episode, and that's why he wasn't able to keep And that's how Smike went from being, I guess, a student to the school into indenture servitude, as we see him at the
Yes.
beginning of the play.
And it's also because of Ralph that Smike kind of turned out the way he did because he kept him locked in the attic.
Mhm. Yes. So lots of stuff going on here
Mhm.
in this big reveal. And so, yeah, after hearing this whole story, Ralph is legitimately devastated. And can we just take a moment talking about
Mhm.
like good acting? I know we don't necessarily have a cast shout out section on the docket for this very packed episode, but like
Yes.
John Woodvine as Ralph really
He would be
sells
my
this
shout out for
moment.
this episode.
Well, and I would also say Alan freaking Armstrong in the prison scene, like
Yes.
the way he saw, like, this is a good acting episode. Everybody gets their kind
Yes.
of big final Oscar moments, so to speak.
It's true. It's true.
And yeah, so those two in particular, like
Yeah.
this plot wise, this is like the yay triumphant Nogs episode, but Ralph's progress certainly, I think, gives us a lot of great acting moments from John Woodvine. I think I shouted him
Yeah.
out in our very first episode, and he
You
has been a
did.
constant great presence all the way
Mhm.
through. So good
Yes.
job there. So then, after this horrifying news, the chorus says that Ralph goes back into the streets and he visits a cemetery. And then there's a group of drunks who roll up on him, and one of them begins to do a cheerful dance, which Ralph seems to enjoy. Sure.
It's the theme
And
music we've
then,
been hearing throughout the entire series that
yeah,
we
like I don't know
haven't
what
figured
to
out
make
why it's
of that.
there, but now we get to know where it comes from.
But like, okay, sure. Like I don't know if there's that much to really unpack there, but I don't
Mhm.
know. Yeah, it's the music, sure. um, so then Ralph comes home to the attic-y room where Smike slept as a baby, and
Mhm.
there's an interesting quote here that I will maybe read it now, and then we're going to come back to
Yes,
it
read it.
later.
Yeah.
So, but Ralph, while kind of pontificating on this room where baby Smike slept, he says,
Mhm.
quote, "If he'd been brought up here, might I have been a comfort to him? Might I have been a different man, a
Mhm.
man like my nephew, or like my brother?" End quote.
Yes.
So just remember that. We'll come back to that. So he's realizing the folly of his ways. He repeats the
Mhm.
line that he said earlier about all love is cant and vanity, but clearly is taken on a new meaning now.
Yeah.
Um, and then a messenger comes from the Cherubles requesting to see him tomorrow. And Ralph says, "Well, you can see me tomorrow, all right. Pick a time, any time. It doesn't matter to me. It won't matter soon." Because he stands up on a chair with a noose around his neck. He notices a hook up on the ceiling that he can hang the noose from. He wonders if baby Smike ever noticed that hook and thought about it, if it terrifies him. It terrifies me now.
I
And
am reaching, but I fall.
And yeah, he does what I think is a very, you know, for all the great acting in this episode, he does this bad Smike impression as like his final lines
Well,
where he
he's
goes,
choking.
yeah, I couldn't
He's
like
choking on the
it's
noose.
he is choking, but to me it's clearly supposed to sound like Smike. The OUT, outcast, a noun, cast out, homeless, which like, yeah, little gauche for my taste, but whatever.
I
There,
attributed his speaking pattern to he's really hanging and choking.
like I don't think the character of Ralph is trying to do a Smike impression, but I
Mhm.
think in the staging and acting and directing of it, that's what they were going
Yes.
for. That through choking makes
Yeah.
him one with Smike in a way.
Ah, very true.
And yeah, I don't love that. So anyway, he jumps in the good hanging staging, and yeah,
Yeah,
thus ends the tale of Ralph Nickleby Esquire.
it's true.
So that's the end of part two, Ralph's progress. And
Mhm.
then the third part, which kind of takes us to the very end, I've sort of affectionately named this the happy end of the comedy.
Yes.
um, so it begins with like a very chipper Greek chorus
Mhm.
saying, quote, "And some weeks passed when the first shock of these happenings subsided." So we
Mhm.
don't get to like dwell on the immediate aftermath of
No.
any of this, like the, Nicholas and Kate finding out what happened. We don't get to like, it's just no weeks
Which is
later,
a
and
big
the
thing,
shock.
actually, in the
Mhm.
books. There's more to it.
Okay. Okay, we'll talk about that when we get to the adaptation check-in
All right.
then. But yeah, I just thought like this was like a pretty interesting, like 5 weeks later, like all the immediate aftermath is past, and now we can get to the good stuff.
Yes.
So the Cherubles have invited the whole Nickleby family and Miss Nickleby for some reason that we'll get to in a minute.
We gotta have
over
Miss
for dinner.
Nickleby.
She's not part of the Nickleby family, but it's
She's
okay.
close enough to it.
She's close enough, and there's a very deliberate reason why she's there. So,
Yeah.
so the Cherubles have invited them all over for a dinner party. So first they ask
Mhm.
Tim Lincolnwater to take Mama Nickleby and Miss Nickleby aside for a moment, so they can have a word with Nicholas and Kate.
Yes.
So they reveal that because of the safe uh, capturing of the deed, Madeline will receive £12,000 upon her marriage. And they wonder, well, then, Nicholas, perhaps you can be the one to marry her. And Kate, perhaps you should be the one to marry Frank, whom you claim to love and who proposed to you. Yet neither one of you seems to want to marry these people. What a perfect fit is being squandered. So, so basically, Nicholas and Kate, because both of these romantic prospects are now likely to have a lot of money,
Mhm.
they don't they don't want to like tarnish their honor by accepting these proposals, thinking that it'll the optics of it will appear very much like they're only doing it for the money to save themselves from squalor. And Nicholas says this kind of important line, I'll quote it now and then we might come back to it again later.
Mhm.
Quote, we have, my sister and I, have learned nothing in our journey so strongly as we've learned what happens to the kindest and the noblest and the gentlest people when their souls are tainted by the touch of money. End quote.
Mm.
So it's not just that they don't want people to think they married for money. They don't want anything to do with money because it is the root of all evil. Big kind of thesis, signboard, message, 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 or so we
Mhm.
thought, because the counter arguments are interestingly persuasive. Frank shows up and he's like, I can't bear it anymore, because he says, Kate, how could you say that money taints every good person? My uncles have money, and are you saying they are tainted? Are they not still the lovely good people they were when they walked barefoot into London? So Kate's like, you know what, Frank, that's a pretty good point. Let me stew on it while this other conversation happens. Because then who also barges in? It's Madeline. And she kind of like, gives Nicholas a hard time for, what? You don't see me as a person anymore. You only see £12,000. And, she reveals that for some reason that, eludes me, that she too has loved Nicholas since the moment they laid eyes on each other. And how can you possibly not want to marry me just because I have money? So he's like, you know what, you make a good point. So Nicholas says, it appears we are overruled, and the two couples unite, Nicholas with Madeline and Kate with Frank. And then Tim
Mhm.
Lincolnwater comes back in, and he has off stage for some reason told this news to Mama Nickleby and Miss Nickleby, who, as far as I'm concerned, could have just been on stage during all of this. I'm not sure why this
Yes.
had to be tell them in a different room. So
Well, they didn't want. Well, like, they didn't want the overly ambitious Mama Nickleby interfering in matters of emotion.
yeah,
You know,
yeah,
like
it's
Mama
true.
Nickleby is a bit power and hungry. It's a bit power hungry.
I guess. And then Tim Lincolnwater and Miss Nickleby kind of have their own little side combo where he proposes to her because all this talk of marriage is making me think about settling down. And so yeah,
Damn
all of
you,
the
Tim
couples.
Lincolnwater!
Yeah, and Miss Nickleby like, oh, but what will the brothers say? Like, they'll be delighted. So love is
Damn
in the
right.
air, and yeah, all three of the couples are finally coming together.
Mm-hmm.
um, so then they're all like, aha, bully, off to dinner. So then
Mm-hmm.
they're going off to dinner, and Nicholas is left behind on stage alone because who happens to come in wearing a dapper new suit? Why, it's Newman Noggs. And
Yes. Apparently, the
he
death of his employer was the only thing that needed to break him of his alcoholism.
his alcoholism and his financial ruin. I'm not really sure how he
Yes.
can afford this suit. Nicholas even says to him, like, how many times have I told you I'd like to buy you a suit? And he's like, no, I had to buy it for myself. um,
He saved his
and
pennies.
Noggs, he saved his pennies. And Noggs, with Nicholas, they have this kind of like very sweet, sincere moment where Noggs says, quote, You don't know what I feel today. You can't, and you never will. And Nicholas, with a big smile on his face, says, I can, and I think I do.
Mm-hmm.
Bow, chicka, wow, wow. So, okay. Let's pause for, and also this is immediately followed by Nicholas like putting out his arm for Noggs to take it, and then
Yes.
they like do this kind of like real romantic gesture and walk off to dinner together.
Mm-hmm.
So let's just pause a moment here, because like I've been talking about this like queer subtext that's been going on with the certainly with the character of Noggs, and especially in his relationship, this pining that he has for Nicholas. Um, my question for you is this in the book? Let's skip ahead just to this portion of the adaptation
No.
check-in. Not at all.
When I was reading it, I never got the queer reading. When I got it was more like almost like Frodo and Samwise.
Not that there's no queer reading to do with that.
Well, the way Peter Jackson directed, unfortunately, came across as a bit more queer ready. But if you read the book, it's very much more like the Batman and the generals during war. These are men who happily like served and supported somebody else. So Noggs being of a lower class, I think he sees Nicholas as a good person and he's willing to kind of be like Samwise there, who's not sure what that was, who was willing to kind of work with him and kind of really hates his employer and is like,
this little sequence of lines that I just quoted, that nothing like that exists in the book of like the
it does it does but once again it comes across as a friendship, not so much as a queer reading. I think also because like, of who's playing Nicholas.
Well, yeah, Roger Rees was gay in real life, but I don't even like, I don't know. I see
this as you said in last episodes, Roger was never great at the whole romantic.
Yeah, he's very awkward in the male female romantic scenes, and like that's not a slight against his acting.
No, not at all.
That's part of me just ghosting, no pun intended, but ghosting just what I know about the actor into the role, to like borrow Marvin Carlson's term.
And it makes sense, and it does make sense to me. I see it as well, and I think that's why the friendship between Noggs and Nicholas comes across a little bit more on a queer reading side, just because these two men clearly have a good friendship with each other that I think can be read as something more. Yeah. Well, in the book, Dickens most certainly did not, in my opinion, did not put it in the book.
Yeah, like okay, so that's I like that this is an aspect of this production, like, because I feel like it's very hard to make a case that this was not a deliberate staging choice and adaptation writing choice, that like this, it's the 80s, queer visibility is starting to kind of, make, we're post Stonewall.
Don't forget, we're still in the time of Thatcher and Reagan and conservatism.
Well, yeah, I'm not suggesting that, I don't think there was ever a situation where Nicholas and Noggs would just like make out for like 13 minutes on the stage and be like, yeah.
Part 10.
Part 10. Like, yeah, so I knew that we weren't going to get any like very explicit romance between these characters, but I do think the staging very deliberately invites this reading, and I like it. I think, the Victorian being this like very stuffy, sexually repressed time, like,
well, they weren't so sexually repressed as we all think. They actually were quite a horny bunch. They just
they were very horny, but
they were just very proud about their horniness. Publicly, they were very stuffy,
but and that's the repressed part of it. So like this, and we saw what would happen to Oscar Wilde just a few decades later. Like, so. So I do very much, this is my OTP, one true pairing of Noggs and Nicholas. I like that they finally get this. We'll talk about how this is slightly undermined in just a couple scenes, but like I do like that they got this very, very prominently romantic moment in there. So the cold weather begins, so I guess it's a few months later or whatever, or maybe weeks, hard to say, and Nicholas is going to Yorkshire. But on their way, and he's like kind of traveling with Kate for this, they happen to pass a little theater, and there's a big sign saying that it's the final performance of the Crummles Company.
That's
and
right.
There's this
They're gonna come
big
back.
reunion. big reunion scene where Mr. Crummles is so happy to see Mr. Johnson, and they hug, and he introduces them to his sister Kate, Mrs. Johnson.
I love Kate's
Kate,
look at him where he's like, Johnson, like,
yeah, and like
what?
Kate's giving him a real hard time about the fact that
Yes.
he lied about his identity.
Yes.
Yeah, like she seems to think this is like the funniest thing ever, like as funny as Kate can sort of. Kate doesn't laugh like at all of this entire production. So
Yes.
like this is the closest she comes to expressing like amusement at anything. Like
Yes.
yes. And so yeah, it starts with just Mr. Crummles, and then Mrs. Crummles and the kids show up, and they're all so excited to see Mr. Johnson, and they're begging him to stay to watch their final performance. But before they go across the Atlantic to America, Americans love melodramas; they'll fit right in. And yeah, Nicholas is like, "Sorry, I have a journey of my own that I must attend to, and I cannot." You know, Mrs. Crummles like does her like eyelash flicking thing to try to seduce him into staying. But once again, it doesn't really work. And also, minor piece of information, but they reveal that Miss Snivolici has married the chandler who was lighting their theatrical productions, and she couldn't be happier. And even though Nicholas is engaged to Madeline, he kind of takes this hard, and Kate gives him a hard time for that too.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's just a thing that's also happening. Anyway, so we get our big Crummles reunion here. You know, this melodramatic reunion, very fitting for the Crummles. So then, you know, the cold winter weather is looming, and Nicholas arrives at Yorkshire. But first, we get a scene with all the orphans who are threatening a little Wackford Squeers Jr., asking him, well, what's happening with your father and his whereabouts, and why hasn't he come back from London?
Yes.
And little Wackford reveals that his father is being sent to Australia. Gotta love colonialism. Yeah. So little Wackford reveals that his father is being sent to Australia, and that another man, that Snolly, has been arrested, and that another man hung himself. That's obviously Ralph. So so obviously, the schoolmaster is not coming back anytime soon, which gives the other boys a lot of confidence to do something they wanted to do for a long time. So when Mrs. Squeers comes with her, what was it? Was it milk and brimstone? Or I remember the brimstone. I don't remember what the other.
It's like a molasses and brimstone.
Yeah. So the brimstone.
Not nice.
Yeah. So when she's like, "Okay, line up for your brimstone," they very systematically each take turns taking one of the implements from her. The first one takes the spoon. The second one takes the pan full of the brimstone. Third one takes away her beating stick, and then they finally have their revolt, and they seize the Squeers, and Mrs. Squeers and Fanny and little Wackford. They plunge their faces into the brimstone. And
they get
it's
their
we don't need no education. It's very good. It's a very satisfying moment. Once again, the audience starts cheering. I like how into it the audience was, and like all these kind of like
the
big
British
come up
really
moments.
do get into that. I mean, like I can tell you from when I was over there, seeing shows like during the big final Les Mis Thenardier number, The Beggars at the Feast. The audience actually literally starts doing the clap along to the music, which is something you never see done over here in North America. When I've seen the show done twice in North America, that there's actually like the audience gets into the clapping and the booing. Like when I was in Wales seeing a show, the bad guy came out on stage, and at the end of the performance, everybody booed him, but the actor took it in stride, and he was like, "Duh." Like,
of course, I'm the villain.
Exactly. Like here, it's always like,
and like we've talked,
we're much more subdued audience.
And we've also talked in the past about bad pro shots that film one version with the audience, one without, and just cut to the audience between the acts, but you don't hear any audience response during. Like Oklahoma was the big offender.
I was about to say Oklahoma being the number one culprit for that.
Yeah, so like I like that. They're filmed it with the live audience. We get to hear their reaction. They're super into it, and these big moments kind of really speak to that.
Yes.
So in the middle of this orphan revolt, Nicholas and John and Tilda arrive to sort of, put down the revolt.
Yes.
By they save Fanny. They sort of
Mhm.
prevent any further violence from happening to Mrs. Squeers,
Yes.
and they say,
Well, I
"Get
mean,
on!"
Mrs. Squeers and the boy have run away. They abandoned
Right,
Fanny.
right, yeah. So Fanny's left behind to kind of.
Yes.
So they say, "Enough, enough! You're free. Run!" And like it's
Yes.
kind of to me, it seemed a little harsh from Nicholas, who of all people should be able to empathize with what these children have
Yes.
been through.
Mhm.
But he's like, "Go on, get out of here! No more violence!" Like, and
It's a
you
little
know,
bit different in the book. We'll get into it.
okay. And then so John is kind of like, "Come on, Fanny, let's take you home. You'll just live with us, I guess."
You'll be our
um,
maid.
you'll be our, spinstery friend who lives with us and maybe cleans. I don't
Yeah.
know. so
Mhm.
so that's the kind of final Fanny moment.
Yes.
And yeah, all the kids run away. Um, and then so this was funny.
Mhm.
Right as they're about to leave, Nicholas turns to John and says, and I quote, "Thank God, at least it's over." End
Mhm.
quote. Which,
Yeah.
like, I've been enjoying this production, but if someone in the audience hasn't been,
Mhm.
and they're now well into hour 8 of this, I
Mhm.
think that line, "Thank God at least it's over," might
Yes.
bring a very different way. And I kind of
Yes.
maybe feel for the actors who've been on stage this whole time and have really been through the ringer with a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
That line maybe means something to them that it doesn't.
Yes.
So yeah, I thought that was a funny line.
Mhm.
So then we get our sort of last little Greek chorus sequence
Mhm.
where one of the orphans, the one who stole the spoon, is kind of alone in the streets because, it's not like they really had a home to get to. They just told them to all like run away. They didn't really do a
Mhm.
good job of putting them into like safe foster care or anything because,
No,
Victorian England. So this one child is like
it's
destitute in the
it's the
streets. And
band-aid solutions that
yeah,
we still see today.
yep. So yeah, so the child is sitting there destitute. All the children have just become like
The
they're
kid
probably gonna.
dies.
Yeah. Wait, which one?
The
The
one
one in
on
the
stage with
streets?
the spoon.
Okay, was he dead? Because he was kind of
Yes,
sitting. I don't know if that was
that kid
established.
dies.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that.
Or at least that's how I read it. Was
Okay.
that as the snow keeps falling, the kid kind of representing the ever unchanging class structure of the world that some
Okay.
people keep living up in Nicholas and kind of and it's the kind of the forgotten poor that we started to play with that
Well, okay. So I'm gonna
someone dies.
my reading of that child is very different, and we'll get to that when I describe
Okay.
what happens with this onstage body.
All
But
right.
yeah, so the child is just kind of sitting there. I didn't necessarily think he was dead, and I don't think that was. I could be wrong, but I don't think that was like outright said. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm.
we get yeah, so he's just sitting there on stage while this sort of final uh kind of like scene where like the whole Nickleby family is on stage,
Yeah.
and we sort of like rapid fire shoot through a lot of the kind of major life events, sort of like an epilogue. So all of the weddings happened. Nicholas and Madeline and Kate and Frank had a joint wedding because that's not weird.
Yeah.
And the firm was renamed Cherubil and Nickleby because
After a
the
while.
Nickleby family, after a while, yeah, because the Nicklebys became much more involved.
Yeah.
And also, yeah, Tim Lincolnwater and LaCreevy opted out of making it a triple wedding. And then just like a few weeks later, they had a secret wedding before
Yes.
breakfast, much to the chagrin of the Cherubils, who obviously would
Yes.
have wanted to be there. But
Yes.
that's how Tim Lincolnwater rolls. Uh, and so then now that Nicholas finally you know, has all the money he needs and that
Mm-hmm.
he's not, destitute, he repurchased their family farm and built expansions onto the house there. He doesn't, change a single room
Yeah.
that was there. He doesn't, remove any rooms, but they built it to allow their family to grow because he and Madeline are having tiny children, and Kate is living just a little
Yes.
short walk away. And who else is also living very close? So it's old Newman Noggs. Yeah, so then that's kind of this big sort of happy conclusion, and then the music begins to swell, and it seems like it's over. But then Nicholas looks down and he notices the child on the streets who may or may not be dead. I
Close to
personally,
death, at least.
yeah, near death. but like I certainly read him as like not dead, because what does Nicholas do after kind of like looking back and forth, looking at his family, looking at the child, deliberating? He goes up and he picks up the child off the ground in a pose that's, very much La Pieta, but certainly reminiscent of how he held Smike at the very end, and a few other times earlier in the play, to a big triumphant soar of the music. And I read that moment not as the child is dead and oh no, what has the society done, and me in particular for sending them into the streets. I read it more as like the child is near death, but now that they have all this room on the farm, Nicholas is lifting them up, and maybe that'll become the better version of the Yorkshire school. And, he's going to, use his wealth and his resources to do his part to solve this urban poverty problem as best he can. So that was my reading of it. If the child is already dead, then it is a much more somber no moment.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I will tell you that child is not in the book.
Okay. Well, I think that is like a good staging, liberty to take. I like this as this final tableau we end on. I just think it means a lot more if the child is still alive and he's lifting that child up literally and saving him, as opposed to just, no, you're already dead and now I'm going to lift you up because I guess I'll give you a proper burial.
Yes.
I don't know.
Well, shall we get into adaptation? Because I have a note from the last episode, because as we mentioned the last episode, I had not finished reading Smike's death chapter.
Okay, yeah.
So you had alluded to the fact that Smike was a bit of an Eponine, looking down at Kate.
Mm-hmm.
So in the book, after like Smike is on death's door, Smike actually reveals that he does love Kate, and that he actually removed himself from her company when Frank visited because it broke his heart to see them together. Even though he knows Frank loves her. And he actually asked Nicholas to bury him with a lock of Kate's hair that he wears around.
Okay, that last bit's a little creepy, but I would have liked to see a moment where he has this heart-to-heart with Kate and he kind of does the whole
No, not with Kate. This is with Nicholas.
He doesn't tell Kate that he has these feelings?
No.
Okay. See, now
just to Nicholas. And apparently Nicholas wears a locket of Kate's hair around him.
Yeah, which is also creepy. But yeah, so okay, my misreading of what you just said, like I thought Smike has a moment with Kate where he says, no, I love you, but you should really be with Frank and I'm going to die anyway. Like that would have been some nice way to give him agency sort of right before the end and kind of like...
Nope. It's really just confession to Nicholas.
So yeah, I don't feel like if it's just that, I don't feel like that was a great loss here. I
do feel it's a bit of a loss that we never got this confession, just because, as you said, they had set that up in the end of episode 7 when Smike is looking on
the worst episode, by the way.
Yeah, looking on mournfully at Kate and Frank. So I think they're, and I mean, very clearly they've been setting up some of that element of like Kate or of Smike looking long, or like having a bit of a crush on Kate. Yeah. So the fact that they're in the book, there is actually a confession scene.
So my reason for not thinking it's a great loss is because for all of the tell, don't show that we get from this production, I think the fact that we see Smike looking longingly it's the confession to the audience well enough that I don't think we need the confession to Nicholas. That's just padding the runtime. I think, and my fix would be give Nicholas a moment where when Smike is looking longingly at Kate, maybe not in that moment, but perhaps on their journey back to the country home, maybe give Nicholas a moment where he notices that Smike kind of is looking at Kate a certain way, and maybe they make eye contact and nod like knowingly at each other without needing to have the conversation. That might have been like a compromise, but I don't feel like if it was in the book that Smike had this like confrontation with Kate and he confesses his feelings to her, that would have been a different story.
Not to her.
Because that's, you know what? We'll come back. Remember that thought because I might bring it up later. But okay, so continue your adaptation.
So yes, that was the one thing there. So as I had mentioned in the last episode, there was the whole Squeers and Peg episode was supposed to happen earlier, but they moved it to this episode, which I was fine with. So there's that. Let's see what other big things are there. The whole Crummels scene. For some reason, I couldn't find it at the end of the book. That is not a thing that happens at the end. It does happen.
Okay, so this
It does happen.
it
I do
does
have a note here that like Crumbles go to America, but I didn't write down where in the book it happens.
because
I
it
just
was
know
probably just a throwaway piece of narration that like Nicholas read it in the newspaper or something. It probably wasn't like an actual.
potentially.
So
Either
and
way,
like I
either way,
think
there's no
that's
big like reconciliation scene like we saw in the play.
well, and I think that's really interesting because okay, well, we will talk about this in just a little bit, but
Yes.
I think it's we talked about this a few episodes ago when the Crumbles were a lot more prominent, but I think it's interesting meta theatrically to track how the theater version of the story emphasizes these characters in ways that they
Yes.
weren't necessarily on the page.
Yes.
So we'll put a pin in that too.
Yes. We do get more of the mourning of Smike's loss in the book. They do come
Okay.
back. They do come back from there, and there is, and there is more stuff going on. I mean, it's a bit of an extended version of the scene we saw where Nicholas and Kate kind of get engaged. There's stuff that happens before that where they're mourning, and
Two
Mama
other
Nickleby
people, not
is
to each other.
yes,
Phrasing.
yes, yes, and I mean Mama Nickleby is there too, but she's mourning in her own selfish way, not really in a genuine way.
Okay. So, okay, I think it's interesting because, like, yeah, I did feel like that was something that was missing from this episode. Because we ended on Smike's death in the previous
Yes.
episode, and then we go straight to the sting into Ralph's progress. We don't see, I was going to say this in my summary, but I sort of forgot, like, we don't see Nicholas or Kate until halfway through this final episode.
They're gone,
in
yeah.
this episode. And, like, and by then it's already the several weeks after Ralph's suicide.
In the book, Ralph's suicide is broken up. So basically, Booker acknowledges his own responsibility, culpability in this Smike situation. And then Ralph runs out of the house, and then we get the engagement sequence. So there is a bit more time between Ralph's realization and his death. And it's broken up by this episode of engagements and mourning. So
and like I don't think there's anything wrong with the having the Ralph's progress be one sort of just like long sequence. I kind of liked that, you know. I didn't unless they were gonna like really show it in contrast with something that thematically echoes or like, you know, foils it. I don't see any reason why that shouldn't have been combined. I think that's fine, like editorializing.
Yeah. So basically, so like that whole sequence happens. I mean, Ralph's death is the same in the book, that he goes home and he commits suicide. There is no knock at the door. Yes, there is.
Okay.
Yes, there is. Sorry, my bad. I'm just reading all my notes here that I typed out from my thing here. Anyway, so Ralph has his moment there. Now, the one big thing they left out was that at the end, the Nicklebys do not claim Ralph's money because Ralph has money. They call it blood money. So Ralph's money goes back to the state. Which is why Smike's death
save all these orphans.
No, it just goes back to the state. That's the last we hear of the money. But it's important because if Smike were alive, then Smike would have gotten Ralph's money as his son. But because nobody's there to claim the money that Ralph coveted so much, basically the money becomes null and void. It's useless. It kind of represents that the waste of Ralph's life that he had prioritized money.
But most of his money, like as the sort of final scene with Lord Frederick indicated, like most of his money was kind of immaterial. It existed on a spreadsheet in debts, but like he didn't actually have it, and that's why something like the death of Lord Frederick was able to bankrupt him. Like, so
he wasn't bankrupted. I think the play makes a bigger deal of that. Like, yes, it's a loss of money, but Ralph still has money.
Okay.
And in the book, Ralph's a little bit more of a Scrooge, where he is very kind of money.
Yeah, like he's very money in this. I just feel like if he still had money, then that makes that, like, you know, Lord Frederick gambit a little less powerful if it doesn't completely ruin him. Like,
well, I mean, overall, the thing is that nobody takes Ralph's money, and that his big kind of life goal of being rich over family proves.
I think if I were kind of like rewriting this, and we'll get to that maybe in a minute, but like I knowing that I would have Nicholas, you know, take the money because
but that goes against Dickens. That's like a blatant change from the book.
He should take the money and build the new orphanage, and like he should actually like pay it forward as opposed to just letting the state absorb it and not put it into social programs. Like, I think if you want to solve these, socioeconomic problems, you have to invest into the problems.
True,
like,
but
as we sort of see.
I don't think that's what I don't think I definitely don't think that's what Dickens' point was.
Yeah.
Was that Nicholas is going to do all this virtuistic orphanage stuff?
It's not going to build the orphanage.
No, no, not at all. So yeah, that's why I like that type of change. I would be very much against, because I'm like, that totally goes against the author's original intent when you're adapting. There's like little changes.
I honestly do not give a shit about the author's original intent. This is an adaptation, and we are going to get to that in a minute. Like, but yeah,
you and I are going to have a very good debate on that then, because I have some very different views.
And your views are just kind of very conservative is all I can say about that. But like,
Anyway, so there's that. Ultimately, the book ends not with Nicholas doing the whole pick up the child routine, but it ends with the children often placing flowers on Smike's grave, reflecting on his sad life.
Okay.
So Smike still has a part to play at the very end of the book.
Yeah, and I think that's fine. And I think I see that the lifting of the child, like here, kind of functionally does that, because the fact that it creates the Smike tableau obviously evokes what Smike has left with Nicholas, like the sort of compassion that Nicholas has because he knew Smike, and I see that as like this hopeful he will save the orphans or do what he can to save them.
Yes.
So yeah, I liked the ending. Is that all you have for the adaptation check-in?
That's the main stuff.
Okay.
I mean, like, you find out certain people die. Like Booker goes off and dies in prison. There's Grod gets out of prison. So does Ken.
Sure.
There's some more resolutions that they left out, but overall that was kind of the main adaptational stuff.
Okay. So something I'd like to do now, and I've sort of been wanting to do this for like a lot of the episodes, but because I didn't know where it was going, having not read the book, I didn't feel like I was in a position to say what was important or what was going to be important.
Yeah.
For the amount of time they spent on certain things, I thought for sure this will be important and indispensable. And, so what I'd like to do now is, having seen the whole thing, I kind of want to script doctor this a little bit. Like, I am a dramaturg, as you often introduce me. And I honestly think you can make a very razor sharp 2-hour version of this play.
I agree.
You have to change a lot, but I kind of want to start.
What you're going to change here?
So first of all, I'm going to just begin by rattling through things we can cut, and you know what my number one on this list is going to be. Lily Vick in the Kenwigs. So I have made I have not pulled punches about how much I dislike these characters in all of our previous episodes in which they've appeared.
Yes.
And now that we've finally gotten to the end, we really don't need them. Like,
they can go.
And I am not a Dickens scholar, I'm far from it, but I am struggling to even think, like, to decipher what thematically they even mean in the story, because I get that that's separate from what they do for the plot. But like, I don't see Mr. Lilyvick as a foil to Ralph, as like a different kind of rich person. I don't see him as like
I don't think he's a foil to Ralph. I think he's more just a reflection of kind of like inheritance and money and kind of the corrupting, sometimes the corrupting power of that. Like, Lilyvick very much gets on his high horse about, I am the one who has the money, who will pass it down. And ultimately it all kind of blows up in his face because he gets married, gets divorced, has to come crawling back to his family. And once again, but it's not necessary. It's not necessary to plot. So I agree. Cutting that.
Yeah.
Go for
it. I was, and again, like, I would have been happy to find out that they did play some big role in the conclusion, but the fact that they don't.
Yeah.
And again, the fact that they play a big role in the conclusion wouldn't justify all the time we've spent with them, but it would at least justify their presence.
Yes.
But the fact that they don't, the fact that the last scene we've gotten with them, Nicholas isn't even in it. It's the first time that he's like in a scene with, or that they have a scene without him.
Yeah.
Yeah. Lilyvick's Kenwigs, get rid of him.
Go. Yeah, I agree. Go. Cut him.
Number 2, I know you'll be happy to hear this one, the Muffins.
Yes, Muffins.
So the Muffins
ultimately didn't prove to be overly important. They came back as like Ralph's going to sell the stocks and short the company.
Yeah.
But you don't need that.
we know that Ralph is an unscrupulous businessman. Like
Yes.
we didn't need this long scene. Unlike the Lilywicks, it didn't take up that much time. It was just one very long scene in the first episode, but
Yes.
we could do without it. Like
Yeah. Chop it.
all right, this is where they're going to start getting a little more controversial.
Okay.
Tim Lincolnwater and Miss LaCreevy. Yeah, cut him. I like them. This is why I'm saying it's going to get a little controversial. I like these characters, but when you're cutting 8.5 hours down into 2, these are not characters we need. Like to me, they're only
Yeah,
there
you know what? I do agree.
because we like
I
them.
do agree.
They are,
They can go.
yeah, they are
They
likable
don't
characters,
add.
and to me,
Yeah. I mean, yeah. They don't add much overall to the plot. I mean, it's nice giving Nickleby somebody like a nice lame lady that is there as their ally.
yeah.
But you don't.
But it would actually
really
raise the
need
stakes
that.
if they didn't have her. The fact that they can just
Yes.
as easily go back to Miss LaCreevy kind of diminishes
Yes.
how reliant they are on Ralph.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I think we can do without her. It would actually make it. And Tim
I
Lincolnwater,
agree
like
with you, Ryan.
if I was rewriting this, I
Mhm.
would maybe when Nicholas first meets the Cherubles,
Mhm.
I would kind of do a fan servicey throwaway line
Mhm.
in which the Cherubles say,
We lost
our
our
great
Tim
head men.
Lincolnwater.
What's that?
We lost our Tim Lincolnwater. He died.
Yeah, that Tim Lincolnwater just ran off to marry some Miss LaCreevy. Like throw in like a fan servicey line
There you
that
go.
like
Yeah, I
pays
like
homage
that.
to
You know,
them,
that
and
works.
that's why
No, I
they need
approve
to
of that.
hire Nicholas.
Yeah.
Like,
Okay.
like show that we haven't forgotten about this character, but we
Yes.
don't need him in a very razor sharp
Yes.
like thinning
Yeah,
of this.
I can agree with that. I can agree with that.
Okay, so next one. I feel like this will be less controversial, but it is more of a bit of a radical rewrite.
Okay.
Cut Mr. Snolly and functionally give his role to Gride the Goblin. So have Gride.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see
have
that.
Gride be the one who they forge the documents to say is Smike's real father. And
Okay.
I would, and my reasoning for this is in episode 7, the one I hated. We kind of like blew our load in the high drama stuff.
Yeah.
Like for very little like payoff because we had
Yeah.
the Ralph and Snolly crashing the dinner party,
Yes.
being like, aha, this man is the real father. What I think we should do instead is in Gride and Madeline's wedding, when Nicholas and Kate come to crash it,
Mm-hmm.
what should have then happened is not offensive but defensively. Ralph should say, hang on one moment. This man, the groom, is actually Smike's father. And then so sort of combine the high drama moments together and sort of have this be a battle of Nicholas is like, we're going to save Madeline. And like, well, I'm going to now pull out this card that I've been saving of this man is going to take your Smike away. So I think, those two characters can be combined, and Gride is the one I would keep over
agree
Snolly.
combining the characters just because, once again, they're very similar to each other, and it kind of gets very confusing after all. It's kind of like Game of Thrones where they have way too many characters to keep track of after a while, and it's like, okay, who is Septa Ordain? Who is Septa Unella? Who is this? Who is that?
Yeah.
Like,
and characterization wise, I can't speak to the book, but at least in the production, I think they did a good job of making these characters feel different in the acting and the but I think Gride could have very well functionally done the thing that Snolly does, and that he kind of only exists to be the fake out father for Smike.
Yes.
And wouldn't that be an extra double blow to Nicholas if not only is this man going to marry the woman you love, but he's also going to take away your best friend? Like,
go for the heart.
I think that would have been much more powerful.
Yeah, I agree. No, I agree with that change. I think that's a fine change.
Mm-hmm. All right, this one I feel like you're going to push back against.
Okay.
Fanny's attraction to Nicholas.
What about it? Cut it?
Cut it. Because it only really is important in 2 moments. The sort of long kind of scenes they have together in episode 2 when she's very much, after him and he's not having it.
Yes. And also the letter.
And the letter. Yes, that's the second one. So the letter doesn't require this like personal vindictiveness on Fanny's part. Nicholas has assaulted her father and made off with one of the orphans. Like,
Yeah,
that's enough
you know
reason
what?
to
I
write a
agree.
letter to Ralph.
I
Now,
agree.
the kind of more interesting part is like the kind of like the whole scenes with like Fanny and Nicholas and John and
Mhm.
Tilda. Like, I loved all that in episode 2. I still think is one of the
Yes.
strongest episodes. But in a 2-hour version of this, we need to get to the punch sooner. And
Yeah.
as much as I liked that sequence, it is delaying our progress to the
Yep.
punch.
No, I agree. You know what? I agree.
Okay, I thought because you've been a big Fanny stan this whole time, so I thought for sure you were not going to like
I
that
just
one.
enjoy Fanny and John, just their comedic
I do
duo.
too. They're
But I
great
agree that once again,
characters.
if we're trying to cut this down into a one-parter versus a two-part 8-hour epic, I'm okay with that type of cut. Because once again, you're not overly changing the character. Fanny is still very vindictive toward Nicholas, but it's not so much emotional. It's more just beat up my dad. He stole a
Yeah,
child. Like
and
it's not. Yeah.
you can maybe put in like little things about like who she's making eyes at him, but I don't think
Yeah,
we
well,
need the
that's what happens
whole.
in episode one when Fanny's leaving him in
Yeah,
the attic, right?
yeah,
That's all you need.
like she's attracted to him, but then
Yes.
because he assaulted her father, she's against him, and that actually
Yep.
solves the problem of Nicholas destroying her and making him kind of unlikable for the first stretch
Yes.
of things.
Agreed.
So yeah,
Yeah, I'm okay with that. See, okay, all right. So nothing,
okay,
nothing major. I've been
okay. I have two.
against.
I have two left.
Okay.
The first one, I don't think this will be very controversial, but it's less of like a character plot point and more of just like a thing we've had a lot of in this production.
Okay.
The narration.
Yeah, we can. Yeah, we can trim that a bit.
Yeah, I'm not saying cut it, I'm saying trim it, but I wrote
Yep.
down one piece of the narration in particular that I think is emblematic of what I'm talking about should be cut.
Mm-hmm.
So during Ralph's progress, when he's like going from place to place,
Yes.
and when the young woman takes him to prison to see Squeers,
Yes.
I wrote down word for word what the narration said in that moment. Listen to this. Okay. And the Lambeth police office. And in the Lambeth police office, there was a kind of waiting room, and Ralph was shown to sit and told to wait. And shortly afterward, 2 officers admitted Ralph Nickleby to Mr. Wackford Squeers.
That's not needed.
No, he could just show up to Squeers. Like, do we really? So, and that's the thing. I single out that one, and every single episode has had like instances like that. Because I'm not against the narration on principle, but I think use it economically in a way that compensates for things that could not be dramatized.
Yeah.
We don't need to be told that Ralph had to wait a bit before he got to see Squeers. We could just have Ralph show up to Squeers.
Yes.
But if you maybe like are having a hard time dramatizing, say, the Mantellini factory drama or what have
you. That is something I forgot. In the book, we get one more Mantellini episode.
Okay, lay it on me.
It's when Kate and Nicholas are off to go and visit like Yorkshire.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, like that just totally triggers something in my brain because I remember.
Does anything noteworthy happen, or is it just another yep, we see you again?
It's Kate identifying them, and then also them showing that their situation has not improved. Mantellini got out of prison, and that he's just about to go cheat on Mrs. Mantellini again, and she beats him over the head with the clothing basket.
Yeah, see, we don't need that. Okay, so I will say the Mantellinis didn't make my list of obvious cuts.
Yeah.
Because I think they're good characters. And
I would cut them.
I
would cut the sequence. It's not needed. The biggest thing is Hawk and Kate. That's the major conflict for her. That's what you need.
So I'm hesitant to cut them. I feel like if I were actually to sit down and write my 2-hour version, they probably would eventually get the axe, but I would probably hold on to them for longer than most things. Right. Certainly, like, not the things that I've listed so far, because I do think a big thing that I've liked, and I've sort of praised this in several previous episodes, is how much we do have Nicholas and Kate back to back, that it isn't just the Nicholas story and, oh yeah, he has a sister too. Yes. I like that Kate has adventures of her own.
Yeah.
And, I was going to wait to talk about this until I finish my list, but I might as well just say it now. That if we were to do a really radical rewrite of this...
Oh, no.
You know what I would also cut?
What?
I'm not saying that this is something I would cut in my just like standard 2-hour version, but But if we really want to get crazy, I would cut Nicholas, and I would call this The Life and Adventures of Kate Nickleby. And
Yeah, no, you can't do that. That's just
no,
like now go write your own story.
well, that's what I'm saying. It's an adaptation, a kind of like radical revision, and very much revision with the hyphen in the Adrian Rich sense. But what I would say here is that I could see in, the year of our Lord 2021, where, feminism exists, even if it barely exists, and it also existed in Victorian times, I'll remind you, we could have Kate do some of Nicholas's adventures. And I could see a version of this story that combines the two characters into one of them. And if it were only going to have one of them, I'd rather it be Kate than Nicholas. So I would like Kate to go to Yorkshire.
It's become less of an adaptation and more just of you.
It's a revision.
Your own, not even a revision. It's more just you writing your
own.
So
it is a revision with a hyphen, as Adrian Rich defines it, as this feminist revisioning of a story. Like, right. Like I would like to see that version. I'm not saying like this is what it needs to be, and we don't need Nicholas. He's not important, but I think that this sort of dual protagonists that we had with them, I like Kate kind of more than I like Nicholas throughout most of it. And I don't see why we couldn't have Kate go on some of the same adventures that Nicholas did, go to Yorkshire. She could be the one that saved Smike. And, it could be Frank, who's in this like state of financial precarity, or a Frank character. Frank could take the Madeline role, and it can be that, or it could still be Madeline, and maybe we can have an explicitly queer romance again in the year of our Lord 2021. This is okay. We can do this. Like,
no, I don't know how much of a fan I would be of that. Not because I don't like your story. I just think if you're going to go that far in a revision, just write your own.
Well, and again, that's what it would be. That's what it would be, the life and adventures of Kate Nickleby, and it would be exactly that, rewriting a version. That's not what I'm suggesting for my 2-hour cutting. But if we're getting kind of creative anyway, it's an idea worth entertaining. I was going to save that for the very end of my list as like instead of all that, we could just do this. Which would,
it definitely be a new interpretation.
If anyone wants to take it, like, you have between now and when I actually get around to writing it to beat me to it. So, okay, the last one, and I think it's going to sound more controversial than it is. Can you guess what it is?
Is it going to be something about Nicholas saving Smike?
No, why? Why would I cut Nicholas? Oh, okay, well, no, that's a rewrite that I've suggested before, that I think, yes, Nicholas should be more active in like all the heroics that John does. And I would even put Nicholas in the scene, the sort of Maury Povich scene that I was describing before, in the Cheruble's office with Ralph, because I think it would be interesting to have Nicholas also react to, oh my God, Smike was your son. Smike was my cousin. How dare you destroyed him, you monster! Like that. I have. Trust me, this isn't the entire list of everything I would change. This is just like big stroke cuts and obviously.
So what is your? Is it the Crummels? Would you cut the Crummels?
I would not cut the Crummels, but it is about the Crummels, and this is why
reduce the Crummels.
I would certainly reduce them, because we have a whole play's worth of stuff about the Crummels here.
Yeah.
If we're talking about other sort of radical revision ideas, I think you could cut out the Crummel stuff into just a play of its own. You can do like a, Mr. and Mrs. Crummel are dead, a la Tom Stoppard, and just like what were the Crummels up to this whole time? But that's, I say that kind of jokingly, but I've drawn this comparison before between the Crummels and Timon and Pumbaa in The Lion King.
Yes.
Where also the Rosencrantz and Guildenstern of that story, and Lion King 1.5 is very much the Stoppardization of The Lion King. Yeah. Well, it occurs to me that if Timon and Pumbaa only existed in the Oasis, they save Simba, raise him into an adult lion, then he leaves to fulfill his destiny, and then we never or barely see them again. Yes. We wouldn't remember them as very good characters.
Yes.
What makes them good characters is that they realize that they can help Simba, and they go on to participate in the climax.
They also realize that, like Simba, they can't just ignore the world.
Yes, they have an arc, they have a lesson. They have an arc, a lesson, and they are actively involved in the climax of the story.
That they are. They call me Mr. Pig.
in my rewrite,
Mm-hmm.
that's what I would do with the Crummels, because I don't want to cut them, because I think they're great, and I do think it's important to have this some semblance of home and stability that Nicholas and
Yes.
Smike find while sort of neglecting their problems in London.
Yeah.
But I need the Crummels to have the "they call me Mr. Pig" moment of actually, realizing that they can help. And I don't know what it is. I would really need to like stew on this for like,
Mm-hmm.
do they sort of do they maybe take over the John role and they're more involved in saving Smike? Do they,
Yeah.
or are they? Is it something more that it's them instead of Noggs, or in addition to Noggs that and Frank who come and like catch squeers, and like I don't know what it would be. None of these really like quite make sense why it would be them.
Yeah.
But while I was very happy to see them in this final episode,
Mm-hmm.
that's not a payoff.
No, that's just like an epilogue for them.
Yeah, it's an epilogue. It's not like a wow, it's like, oh yeah, we forgot about these characters, but aren't you happy to see them again? like it doesn't pay off. Like, wow, I'm so glad we dealt with them before because now they're here. And like another reason why I don't want to cut them is because I do think Smike's apothecary sort of swan song
Yes.
is like it's a nice moment, and obviously if we
Yeah.
cut the Crummels entirely, we could replace
Makes
that with
no
something
sense,
else.
Yeah.
But I do like that, and I like the Crummels, and I like what they stand for in the story, and I especially think that a theatrical adaptation shouldn't neglect the theatrical element of this, like we talked
Sure.
about. Like, but yeah, I want the Crummels to become more active agents in the story, not just a momentary distraction. Because if all they're going to be is a momentary distraction, we kind of can cut them and just come up with something else pleasant.
Well, like you said,
Smike
it
isn't doing.
could be Nicholas has his father's book of Romeo and Juliet that he keeps with him at all times, and as they're on the road, he's teaching Smike how to
Yeah.
read through this book that his father taught Nicholas how to read through.
Yeah, like there's, this is just me like spitballing things like that have kind of occurred to me while watching. But
Yes.
yeah, I think I don't want to lose the Crummels, but I think we need to do more to justify why they're here and make them more participating in all of this. Like, so that's my kind of broad stroke script doctor.
You know what? I don't mind your broad strokes. I definitely can see that. What I will say is certain things that get changed in from book to stage or book to screen that then lose some of the author's original character intentions and change the characters dramatically, or lessen a certain plot point for the characters. So, like for example, when Lord of the Rings was done, they cut Tom Bombadil, a very popular character from the first book. I've had no problems with that loss because I go, it's a great episode, but Tolkien didn't know where that story was going. He thought Tom Bombadil may come back as an important character. Hence
And
why
that's
he
how I
wrote
feel
him.
about the Lilywicks.
Yeah.
Like, because I
Like you
think
can cut
Dickens
them and they're okay. And I mean, as Peter Jackson said, we see them go into the forest, but we cut away to Saruman and Gandalf. So we don't really know. I mean, they could have met Tom Bombadil while Gandalf was off doing his scene. We don't know. Like, it's not like we just actively chose to cut them. It's just we don't see that particular adventure. So I'm fine with that. It's when certain things when you get into like Harry Potter and in those adaptations where they cut large swaths of character development for the sake of centralizing it on Harry, which or changing radical things. Like, for example, in the book, a lot of Ron's lines get given to Hermione to give her more importance. When it's like that diminishes Ron's importance in the book and also diminishes his character's like own world intelligence. Like thinking all the way back to the second movie when Hermione gets called a mudblood by Draco Malfoy. In the book, it's Ron who explains what that insult means, which basically means Draco's basically calling Hermione the N-word. Is a good interpretation of what that word is. But somehow Hermione, who is yes, but somehow Hermione, who is sure she's well read academically in the world of the wizards and witches, but she wouldn't know all these colloquialisms. That's Ron's world. So the fact that Ron realizes what has just been said and sticks up for Hermione, then has to explain between puking up slugs what that moment means, now diminishes it because they gave it to Hermione because Emma Watson could cry on command.
So
like, and it's those types of changes there, or like in the sixth book, when like Ron's not even in the finals and he's sitting off to the side, and Hermione and Harry have their own conversation looking out at the lake. It's like, well, Ron should be there because Ron actually has an active part in telling Harry no, we're going on the adventure with you. It's when those type of changes where you're starting to cut and change characters dramatically for the sake of
Yeah, like
film convenience. That's where I go, okay,
some
now I'm having problems with what you're doing. Because
so
now you're totally undermining what's supposed to be.
I hear what you're saying. I kind of feel like what the examples you're using kind of, I don't think they're as radical as you seem to imply they are. Like they're good.
Well,
They're good things in the book, and I'm not saying like, oh, it's better in the film because they, I don't see that as so essential that you can't economize with these things.
I agree. So yeah, a lot of your changes, Ryan, I am totally for. And I think your revisionist version would, I look forward to reading that script to see what I would think of that very big altered revisionist cut of this tale. But I think, your overall cuts, I definitely think you can cut this down to like a 2.5, Les Mis 3 hour, 3 hour.
One night of theater with like one long intermission. We can do that.
Yes. Exactly.
I also forgot to mention.
Or do it as a 3-act break. Basically.
Minor thing, but I also forgot to mention in my sort of reworking of the Crummels, I would cut Miss Snivellicci. We don't need her.
Yeah, no, I agree. She can go.
Yeah. Like, she's a fine character. I like the actress.
Once again, it's for the Lily Vick story is why she's there.
But partly, but like it's also to give Nicholas a love interest, and it's just distracting from the love interest that he's eventually going to wind up with. He doesn't need to fall in love with every woman but Fanny that he meets along the way. Like,
poor Fanny.
Poor Fanny. And that's why I would cut another part of the reason, or as I mentioned, why I would cut the Fanny romance subplot. So those are all of my script doctorings.
Okay. A lot of them I agree with.
Yeah, so let's move on to our usual suite of check-ins. Let's start with the scar.
The scar is still there. It's not it didn't pan out the way I thought it would. Where it was going to be a distinguishing plot point of go after Nicholas, the man with the scar.
No, but I do like that it was still there, still gradually getting fainter. But by the very end, he still carries the scars that he accrued on this journey. That he doesn't he's not cured just because
it's like Jean Valjean's brand.
Yeah.
That he carries on his chest at all times.
601. Yeah. So while we didn't have the melodrama look for the man with the scar, I do like again the scar check-in has always just been a big shout out to the makeup team. The good job of kind of having this fade over time, and that is the end of our scar check-ins. Life's not fair. Speaking of Scar and the Lion King. Okay, Les Mis check-in. I know you want to talk about this one.
Oh yes, I do. So there is a few Les Mis check-ins. I'll start off with one that struck me was John and Nicholas's arrival at the school. Nicholas looks exactly like Javert does in that moment of the Javert intervention at the end of Look Down when the Thénardiers are trying to rob Valjean and Javert comes in and saves the day. The whole chaos and the guy coming with the big trench coat and the clear this garbage off the street moment. I was like, oh, okay, we got a bit more Javert, which is interesting because in the book it's mainly John who does all this.
Yeah.
Nicholas hears a lot of this stuff secondhand from John, and John actually gives the children money and food and sends them on their way.
So
where the kids all kind of some of the kids fall into turmoil because they have nowhere else to go.
So mixed feelings about that. So one, I like that Nicholas is present in this. Like it's the thing I keep talking about. Like, let's get our protagonist more actively involved in the story, as opposed to just having John be the guy who saves everybody. Yes. I wish they had kept the part where they give them money and food. So like
I don't know if they mentioned that in the Greek chorus. I can't remember if they actually. Yeah, I don't think so either.
Yeah.
But yeah, basically in the book, John gives them food and money to the boys. Some of the children don't adapt well to be on school as it was the home they only knew, and so ultimately they do fall further into the underworld.
A bunch of Cockney pickpockets and
go and join Fagin and his gang.
Yeah, that's where I'm going with this. So so while I do like the and I do think that the giving them food and money doesn't undercut the they're not okay on their own, because it's just to give a man a fish as opposed to teach a man to fish. But on your, since we're doing the Les Mis check-in, on your point about the Javeriness, I think that I'm glad you did bring this up, because to me, I thought Nicholas seemed way too angry in this scene, and I wasn't sure why. Like, he of all people should have, I mentioned this sort of earlier, that he should have been.
I think that's a Roger Rees direction choice. There he is shooing the children away. I don't know if it's because he's traumatized from being back in this abusive place again, and he's reminded of Smike.
Maybe, but
upset. I don't know. There's no real justification for his attitude.
I know, and I really kind of what I thought, he was sort of, to me, it seemed like he was doing the Lassie trick of like the
Yes.
go on, you stupid dog, get out of here. I never loved
Yeah.
you anyway because I really need you to leave. But like,
Yes.
but to me, if we evict the Squeers, like Mr. Squeers is in Australia, if
Yeah.
you know Fanny goes with John, Mrs. Squeers and Little Wackford run away, let the kids keep the house.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like give them food and stuff, but like let them keep the house. Don't just tell them to amscray. Like so the fact that there's these Javert vibes, you know, I don't know why they're there, but it's interesting, I guess, is all I'll say about it.
Yes. What other big ones do we have? We have, well, I mean, the obvious one is Ralph's suicide.
Yes,
which I actually have a Dickens check-in with this.
Okay.
Because Ralph becomes almost a mix of Bill Sikes and Monks from Oliver, where Monks realizes Oliver is his long-lost brother.
Right.
And dies. I think I'm pretty sure Monks dies in the book.
Yeah, it's been a long time since I've done any.
But then also, sorry, I don't think Monks dies. I think Monks gets away. But Bill Sikes hangs himself at the end, trying to escape the mob who are coming after him for the murder of Nancy. So.
So
Dickens likes to hang his antagonists at the end.
And clearly the realizing that I'm actually related to this person I didn't think I was related to is like it's very Victorian, it's very melodramatic, it's very
I mean it's even more Javert because it's not so much that Ralph realizes that it's his child, it's the fact that Smike found love and affection through Nicholas, his enemy. And that's what Ralph can't live with, is that Nicholas ultimately got the better of him by befriending and looking after his son, something he could never do. And that's the same thing. Javert can't live with the fact that, Valjean saved a kid. It's the fact that Javert can't live with the fact that he's been proven wrong after all these years of assumptions.
Yeah, it's definitely this like inner turmoil, I think, does have a lot to do. Like, and it's very Javert, and of course, just the villain's climactic suicide is obviously very Javert. Staging wise, obviously it's different, but like
a little bit different. But mind you, like even in the original staging of Javert's death, Javert actually doesn't jump off a bridge. Like the bridge is there and he kind of it's like 2 feet off the ground. So it's like a step for the actor to take. So basically, like at the end, Javert just steps off the bridge and does the hands up in the air.
Which kind of
the lights swirl and the bridge goes up and Javert falls to the ground and kind of gets turntabled off the stage.
Or if it's the movie, you hear a big splat sound.
I hate that so much.
Everybody does.
I think like what was better was the way David Edgar does Javert's suicide in the BBC version. That's a much better interpretation of what that scene is supposed to be, because the movie just misses the big part of the death, which is the river is swollen, meaning it's overflowing. Hence why when he jumps, he doesn't resurface; he sinks because the currents just pull him under. Meanwhile, in the movie, it's a whole other thing. But anyway, so Ralph gets the Javert ending there. We do get the Marius and Cosette marriage scene. As well. Like that's
interestingly, our protagonist doesn't die. Like
no,
I was kind of come to me. I was expecting sort of a big
the ghost of Smike comes and takes Nicholas away.
Yeah, like I would have liked to see that. like, and it didn't have to be because the plot is resolving with you dying because you're old and sick. It could have just been like 30 years later when Nicholas did die, he had like his Smike.
Smike came to him. I would have liked that too.
I would have liked it, but I don't think it's necessary. Again, this precedes Elaine.
Once again, the whole thing was Dickens giving Nicholas a happy ending after all this misadventure. Nicholas gets his happy resolution with the family, money, wealth. You get the positive turn at the end there for Nicholas. So there's the death of Ralph. There's the intervention by Nicholas. There's the marriage. That's very Les Mis. What other ones are there that really stood out to me?
That's above and beyond.
I mean that's the major ones. I mean if you go to the book, there's a little bit more with the Thénardiers escaping to go off to do slave trading, and that type of thing there, and kind of getting paid off. There's that, but like overall, it's very kind of
as opposed to this version where Mr. Squeers being sent to Australia is probably going to become part of the prison industrial complex. Like,
yes, exactly. Exactly. So there's that. But there we go. That's kind of the Les
Okay.
Mis check-in. I
We
mean,
did
there was
it.
a lot of
9 episodes of Les Mis check-ins.
yes,
I
yes.
don't know how we can exhaust that topic anymore.
No,
Okay.
no. I'm pretty sure we covered most of it. I mean, the biggest thing I'll say is that there's a lot of it there. I mean, it's clear that the direction team took a lot of inspiration from this epic when they were translating another epic musical of the same time period
Yeah.
to the
Yeah.
stage,
Well,
which is not a bad thing. I
that's
mean, they learned a lot of good lessons from their
well,
time with Nickleby, and
that's
it showed.
that's what I've been saying about this from the start. Is it's less about, hey, aren't these comparisons neat? It's about using Nicholas Nickleby as a prism through which we can understand how these
Yeah,
artists grew,
yeah,
and Les
yeah,
Mis shows us that. Like,
yeah.
yeah,
Like I will say, like the Javert death, I think is much better stage wise than the Ralph death. I mean, the Ralph death with the weird rope dropping through the trap door and him just kind of hovering on the chair. It
yeah.
kind of
I kind of
it
hate it.
lingered a little bit too long, and I don't think it had the same impact. I think what's nice is that in the Les Mis suicide scene, like it's very brief. Like you get the image of what they're going for, that he's falling to
Yeah,
his doom, and the lights do a lot of the work, and it's a little bit cleaner and not long. Like I think the fact that he lingers so long on the death is like okay, like basically we just need to hear the rope snap, and we get
yeah,
what's
yeah.
happened to Ralph. We don't
Again,
need
in
to
my
have this
in my 2 hour
prolonged death.
version, that'll be a lot shorter, obviously.
Yes.
So, yeah, okay. So that's the link. We have. This is the first episode in which Smike does not appear on stage. I don't know if we can do
Nope,
our
he's
Smike
dead.
check-in. I,
Yeah.
I I was considering bringing up, like, although I already sort of addressed it, what I thought was the Smike impression that Ralph
Yes.
does in his final
We
lines. But we
covered
went,
it.
yeah, we covered it. It's
Yeah.
that's just as awkward to me
Yeah.
as all of Smike's
Yeah.
stuff has been. But yeah,
Yes.
rest in peace, Smike. Um,
Yes. Our first episode out of 9 episodes that does not have a Smike check-in.
Well, yeah, and he died at the second last episode. What are you gonna
Yeah.
do? And he
Yeah.
did not appear on stage. It would have been interesting if we had that come to me moment where
Yes.
Smike is like standing up straight and like perfectly
Yeah.
fine because in heaven there is no disability. Like that would be like an interesting something we could read into.
Yeah.
But they weren't going in that direction, so we don't
No,
need
they were
to.
not.
All right, we've been going on for a while. Why don't we go straight to our how does this individual episode rank and how does it stand as an
Yeah.
episodic unit of television? And then we will do our overall appraisal before we call it a day.
Sure. All right. So for me, I actually really like this episode. I thought
So
this
did
was
I.
a good climax. So my ranking would go now 2, 5, 1, 9, 8, 4, 6, 7, 3.
Okay, so this is your third favorite episode in that ranking, or
This
fourth,
is,
third or fourth?
this comes in at the 4th.
Really? Okay.
Like it's still high, don't get me wrong, but I think what only takes it down a bit is the fact that this is the climax episode, so it's not a standalone episode. You need to
Well,
have
okay. So as I've
like
said before, I don't think standalone means divorce it entirely from
yeah,
everything that came before and might come after.
yeah.
Standalone means, do you feel satisfied watching this as
I
like
do feel
one week of
satisfied, but
television?
I think it's more satisfied as in the fact of like I've watched all 8 other parts and now I'm getting a really good resolution to the
Well,
story, not so
it's
much.
precisely for that reason that this gets my number one spot.
Oh, very good. Okay.
This
Okay,
was
so I
my
stuck the landing.
this was my favorite episode, like of the
Mhm,
experience of watching any individual episode. This one I
mhm.
thought was the most satisfying experience.
Okay.
I was having a real toss up between this and episode two, which one would get the number one and which would get the number
Right.
two spot. And I kind of had to default to the fact that as strong as number two was, I feel like I've sort of mythologized it a little bit since it's had the number
Mhm.
one spot since pretty much the very beginning of this
Yeah.
enterprise. And I had to grapple with the primacy effect a little bit.
Yeah.
Like am I just remembering that that was the best one because it was so early? But then
Right.
by the same token, I had to grapple with the recency effect of this one. Like, do I just really like this one because I
Yeah.
just saw it and it's fresh in my head? But I think overall, just kind of remembering what happens in each episode and weighing
Mhm.
episode two, I liked a lot because, well, there's sort of it did the bookend thing that I like. That it started with Nicholas getting on John's nerves by flirting with
Right.
his fiance, and ends well with John doesn't hold grudges and lets them
Mhm.
go and like is their good friend. And so
Yeah.
I liked the bookend. And then the other thing I liked about it was obviously the climactic punching Mr. Squeers and saving Smike.
Yes.
But overall, I don't think those two things compare to the big kind of like high tension resolving
Yeah.
of threads that we get in this episode. I liked the
Actually, you know
previous.
what? I will
Yeah.
say I'm gonna make a slight change. I'll go
Okay,
2591 because I
two
feel
five nine one.
because I feel the final episode is stronger than the first episode. The first episode, it's a good setup, but it takes a little bit to get into.
Yeah.
This I feel is a great kind of solid top three. So I'm gonna make that change right now.
Okay.
I agree with you. I still think number two just because of the punch scene.
Yeah.
It does have a bit more of a thing. And I mean, for the fact they did include all this Fanny and John and the flirtation stuff, I do find that comedy still holds up. I went back and rewatched it.
I like it. It's a great episode, and it is my number two is number two for me. But and it was almost my number one. But the more I kind of honestly looked at it, I thought this episode just satisfied me more. And to me, it does what a good series finale should do. I know that again, this was all one play or two plays, but one theater experience. But having broken it up into this episodic serialized television, as we've done week after week after week, this is a good series finale. It ties up pretty much all the loose ends. It gives happy endings, like not that things have to end happily, but it gives the happy endings to our protagonists. The villains get their comeuppance. They don't just forget about the orphanage. The things that they do forget about, like the Lily Vicks, don't matter because they suck.
Like the Mandolini's, their final episode gets the cut.
Yeah, like I'm glad we got to see the Crummels again, even though I would have liked to see more done with them. But I was happy. I was happy to see them. So like to me, like I just recently watched. I know this episode is going to be released a long time after we film it, so this is a bit of a carbon dating of when we filmed this. But I recently watched the final episode of Kim's Convenience, which was just sort of debatably, it depends who you ask, unceremoniously canceled for non-Canadian viewers. Kim's Convenience is a Canadian sitcom based on
Netflix. People can watch it.
Yeah, is it not on?
It is
not just Canadian Netflix.
I'm pretty sure it's on the U.S. Netflix too. Same thing with Schitt's Creek, which is why both those series have
Schitt's Creek obviously just won all the Emmys, so like much big deal. But yeah, like
which also had a great finale.
Yeah, Kim's Convenience's finale. Again, I don't think they realized that this was the final season.
Yeah.
Like, one of our lead actors has just been cast in a lead role in a Marvel movie. So, I guess, I'm not sure what factors are necessarily, playing on the show getting canceled. But watching the final episode of Kim's Convenience, while I don't know if they realized it was going to be the series finale when they filmed it, it very clearly felt like it could be. Right. And to me, it's not because there's like, it's a sort of very episodic sitcom. There's some sort of big plot threads, but like, it's not so much because I felt like, they tied up all the plot threads. It's that they kind of just ended on this like nice. Did you watch it, by the way, or am I spoiling?
I just started watching Kim's Convenience on Netflix. I have a long way to go, so I don't mind. I don't mind if you spoil it. I knew that Schitt's Creek ended with a wedding. That's something I knew from the very beginning. So
yeah. So I won't. This is not big spoilers, but Kim's Convenience ended not with like a satisfying let's deal with all the plot stuff that's still hanging and arrive at a happy ending. But it ended in a way that I thought was very sweet and like kind of touched on the big important theme of family that has been a big undercurrent in the entire show.
Right.
And while watching it, you sort of are left with, well, that's it. That's just how the show ends. Like that it kind of, it's bittersweetly unsatisfying, but but
that's
like
life.
That's life. And again, I don't know if they would have written something different had they known the show was going to get canceled, but I think it works. Like this, like I don't know why I'm necessarily drawing this comparison because this is very different. This is we know it's
they knew it was ending. They got to wrap it up.
It's one play, it's one novel. And I think they did a good job of like addressing all the stuff and giving like a satisfying ending. We got 3 big moments with Newman Noggs, and like I kind of, I don't know what better ending I could have envisioned for this. And and to me, the series finale should almost always be everyone's favorite episode. Like
Yes.
things like Game of Thrones obviously don't don't do that, but like,
Yeah.
and I know, say, to compare to something like Breaking Bad, which I know the finale is a little polarizing with that, but
Yeah.
well, it's not my favorite episode. I think it's a very strong episode and it
I
like
will
ends
say
things
I would say
well.
the best season finale that I've watched is The Good Place. That had the
Yeah, the series finale,
perfect,
like the
yeah, the
final.
series, yes. That had the
Yeah,
perfect
I
ending
would
to the
agree.
show. They
I would
knew
agree with
how
that.
long they were going for, and they were like, "We're ending after 4, and this is the ending we're gonna have. This is a very
Well, because
clear ending."
they not only do they make a very satisfying ending that gives closure to all the characters, but they also rewrite world religions essentially in a way that
Yep.
actually makes sense, which like
Yes.
kind of bold stroke for a Michael Schur sitcom. Like,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
yeah, so yeah, good comparison to draw. Like
Mhm.
this is a very much, you know, it might
Good
not
Place
be
ending.
as emotionally impactful as
Yeah.
the Good Place ending,
Yeah.
but this is like a scale from Good Place to Breaking Bad. We are definitely more in Good Place
Yes.
territory with,
Agreed.
or not Breaking Bad. Even Game of Thrones is like the opposite
Yeah.
end of the spectrum of like the,
Yes.
yeah.
Mhm.
So yeah, my official final ranking is 9, 2, 3, 6, 5, 1, 8, 4, 7. 7 is still dead last, of course.
The hatred for 7 still runs strong.
Well, yeah, and you notice like in my kind of script
Yeah.
doctoring, like you know, things like the getting rid of Snolly that would solve like some of the big
Yes.
problems that, you know, I thought plagued Seven, and
Yeah.
putting that whole confrontation into the wedding scene. Like
Yeah.
I would get, if I was rewriting this, I would get to quick business fixing the problems of Seven is like my episode
Yes.
7 has my number one priority. Okay, so that's this episode.
Mhm.
Do you have thoughts kind of as the final appraisal? Does it hit the mark? Would you recommend it to a friend? Would I
You know
teach
what?
this in a
I would.
course?
I'm well, I mean, if I were teaching a course on adaptation of theater, I would definitely include this because I think overall this has been a very faithful adaptation of a source material to the stage. And I would compare that to say something that I'd have to go back through my catalog of plays, but like of things that are based on a book that maybe didn't quite adhere to their source material, and we could do a compare and contrast. And but I definitely think, yeah, this is definitely a thing worth studying. I mean, this is an epic play that kind of kicked off the epic two-part plays, because then after this we had things like Angels in America. Like we had some other big two-parters come along after the fact. But I do think this is an early two-parter that definitely
Well,
set the stage for
what
you
about
can
Henry
do
the
that.
Fourth? Or like,
True.
yeah,
True.
like
Once again, yeah, that's Shakespeare, but Shakespeare had a big. It's not just Henry the Fourth. That's like,
well, yeah, the Henriette is like a big
yeah,
four part, like,
that's like a big piece of thing. It's not
but
just
yeah, no, but yeah,
one story. But yeah, like yeah,
certainly,
I
yeah,
definitely think,
2-part
yeah,
plays.
yeah, I
So
definitely
it's
think, I
interesting
think
what you're
Nicholas,
saying.
yeah, yeah.
So
I mean,
you're
yeah,
saying you would, if you were teaching a course on adaptation, you would assign this as an example of good fidelity.
yes, I would, because
So
I would go, yeah, it's good fidelity, but could you still maintain fidelity while, as you said, doing some broader stroke
like,
combination slicing.
in your mind, is this a playwriting course or is this like theory history course about adaptation? Because
I
like
think it'd
I
be more a
wouldn't bother
playwriting
getting into
course.
my script. Yeah, I wouldn't, if I, like, yeah, if it's a playwriting course, yeah, the script doctoring stuff works. But if I'm just
Yeah.
teaching history and theory of adaptation, I wouldn't bother getting into any of that. Like,
Yeah,
it's not the
I agree. Yeah,
exercise of
yeah,
theory to like.
I agree. If you're just going for adaptations through history and kind of ways, I mean, I mean, actually, to be honest, what I would do if this was just an adaptation course, I would actually put Les Mis in versus Nicholas Nickleby, because I think
Why
that
not
isn't
both?
even. You could do both. You
And
definitely
then
could
you
do
could
both.
actually walk the students through this comparative exercise that we've done and talk about
Yes,
how they inform each
that is
other.
true.
Like,
Well,
so,
that'd be the same thing with doing like Romeo and Juliet and West Side Story, where you could do a
well, yeah,
compare and
well,
contrast, an
that's
adaptation.
different because, you know, we don't teach Romeo and Juliet as an adaptation of some Italian novella that nobody talks about anymore. Like we
True.
teach Romeo and Juliet as the source of
Yes.
things like, you know,
Yeah.
like West Side Story. And so
Yeah.
I don't think you need to do 2 separate weeks from that. You can take it on good faith that your students have probably encountered Romeo and
Romeo
Juliet
and
at some
Juliet.
point, and if they haven't, tell them to read it before we get to that week on the class.
True.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then
I
so,
agree.
and like, so we're talking syllabus design here because I
Yeah.
agree. Like,
Yeah.
this is the first time I feel like I had a good answer to your standard question of would I put this on a course. if I was teaching a course on adaptation theory, which actually is one of my sort of areas of specialty and research,
Love it.
and it is actually the type of special topics course I would love to teach one day, I would 100% put this RSC
I would
Nicholas
take
Nickleby
that
by
course,
David Edgar.
Ryan.
But you know what? I wouldn't be teaching it, as you say, as like good fidelity. I would be teaching it as the perils of fidelity and why
I could see
you
that.
wind up with this big clunky juggernaut that really
Well,
could have
then you
been
can
cut.
compare it with Les Mis, where it's like they took the adaptation of the 1,385 page book and were able to cut that down into a 3-hour musical. And once again, you could attribute some of that to it's a musical, so you can combine the chapter worth of Valjean pacing outside the courthouse debating whether or not I should go in and reveal myself into 1 2-minute song versus what I guarantee if you were doing it as a play, Valjean pacing outside the courthouse may actually take up a good chunk of, say, part 3 of a 5-part play series.
So if I were teaching a course on adaptation, something I would seriously consider, I'm not saying this would be my final syllabus design choices, but the first 3 weeks of the course would go as follows. Week 1, we do one of those Victorian adaptations of Nicholas Nickleby, the kind that was written before the novel was done being published serially.
Maybe the one that predicted the big spoiler ending.
That would be ideal if I could find which one that was. But so start with as kind of this touchstone in the history of adaptation of like, this is, the Victorians loved adaptation, and the periodical press and the sort of commercial theater and a lot of like social artistic factors were happening at the time that sort of facilitated that. And then I would use that as a springboard to week 2. We're going to just cover it all in 1 week, so the students have the week to read or watch the whole thing. And then we're going to, so then we'll talk about a different version of Nicholas Nickleby in the 1980s, in which Thatcherism sort of brought about very similarly Victorian-esque conditions into society talking about. And I would use it as a big case study for this is what every adapter kind of dreams of, this like carte blanche, make it as long as you want, be as faithful as you want. But is that necessarily a good thing? And that's why I would use it as the perils of adaptation. And then week 3, I would do Les Mis, not because I necessarily think it is this pinnacle text of adaptation studies, but because I think I would go through what we've just done, all 9 weeks of this, and do the Nicholas Nickleby and use it as a case study for the development of authorship and authorial voice of these artists in taking one very similar text and those lessons into a new text.
Yeah, I agree, because I definitely think this is worth the watch. I mean, this is an epic piece of theater that I think deserves.
Are you? I guess my question is: are you going to be recommending this to, not like academically, but just like to friends? You have to watch Nicholas Nickleby. Is this
I would. I mean, I mean, my friend on my podcast, Autumn Smith. This is one of her all-time favorite plays. She saw the Chichester revival that was done, that came to Toronto a number of years ago. She really liked that. And she said she actually went and saw both parts numerous times because of how much she enjoyed it. So I mean, I do think this is a major milestone of theater. This is a very iconic. I mean, before even doing this, you and I both knew of this play, and had said we got to do this at some point.
Well, I was just pleasantly surprised to see that they had the whole thing on Broadway HD, and that's how all this started.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, I would highly recommend viewing. I mean, I don't know if I would show my parents, who are the laymen of things. I think I'd rather take them to a live revival and go, this is a really good, exciting 2-part play that you guys have never done before. Like, my parents have never done a 2-part play. That's something they have never done. So the fact that I could go, we're going to go do a really fun Saturday at the theater. We're going to go see part 1. We're going to go to dinner, and then we'll come back and see part 2. This is the kind of exciting thing we're going to get to do. I definitely would take my family to see it that way. But I do think this is a really fun bit of storytelling that's done here. Is it perfect? Far from it, but.
So for me, like, I would certainly recommend it with an asterisk, I think, because because it's so long, and it's obviously a different story if like they've revived it and it's coming to town here in Toronto. I certainly, like, as much as I enjoyed watching this, I would not take a trip to England just to watch this, and I wouldn't tell anyone to do that. But it's a different story. We'll maybe come back to a live version of it, but just for you have Broadway HD already, watch Nicholas Nickleby, I would
Right.
recommend it with an asterisk, because I would say watch episode 1 and episode 2, and if you're not
Right.
sold by episode 2, it probably will not win you over.
Right.
Like, and I think that's
Yeah. Well,
that's to
that's
me
well, that's kind of the thing I go along with TV series where I go, if I'm not hooked by the third episode of a show, I'm
yeah.
out. I'm done. Like that's my rule of thumb for any new TV show I watch. It's, am I hooked by episode 3? And if I'm not, then I've given it its fair shake, because I've
Right.
given the show 3 chances to get me. And if they haven't done it by the third episode, then there's a pretty good chance.
Well, there's some things, like, I find on a show by show basis, some things require more of a grace period. There's often like one
Yeah,
episode where, if
Seinfeld,
you're
for
not sold by
example,
this
took a
one,
long time to kind of get its feet.
yeah, I would
Like
say
the
something
first,
like
yeah.
I would say something like The Wire, for example. I would
Mhm.
say anyone I would recommend The Wire to, I'd say watch the whole first season. If you
Right.
aren't into it by the end of the first season, fine, don't watch season 2, because
Right.
that'll throw you for some loops that you probably will not be okay with. But
Yes.
I wouldn't say to anyone 3 episodes is enough to really sink into The Wire.
Yeah.
Like, I would,
Yeah. Well, it's that's a serialized show. So
yeah.
I do think with serialized
Well,
shows, it's kind of like Game of Thrones. You got to watch a few episodes of Game of Thrones. I'd even recommend watch the whole first season of Game of Thrones.
well, I think
If you don't like the first season, then
to
you're
me, Game of
good.
Thrones, I would move the goalpost for Game of Thrones, that I think if episode 1, if you're not on board with episode 1, you probably won't be, because
Mhm.
that means you're either someone who doesn't like fantasy, or you don't care about what happened to Bran Stark. And like, if you don't care about, and I get that Bran becomes a shitty character as it goes on, but when he's just a rambunctious climbing child in the first
They
episode,
push him
like,
out the window. Yeah.
yeah, like you want to care about him, like, and so if you don't care to find out what happened there, and you're probably not into fantasy medievalism, then yeah, you're probably not going to enjoy the rest of it.
Well, I know my mom, for example, she's not a big fantasy person. What got her on the show was the politics, and that doesn't really come into like episode 3 when we get to
Okay, so
with the small council. So for the first few episodes, she had to
fine.
go, okay, what is this? Like, I'm not turned off by it, but am I like overly invested? Versus something like Succession. Succession is a great show that if you watch the first few episodes, you're gonna get pretty invested in the political story that's unfolding. But you gotta give it a few episodes to get who these horrible, despicable family members are.
Yeah.
So
bringing this back to Nicholas Nickleby,
yes,
the reason why I say episode 2,
yeah,
is as my goalpost for this, is because I could understand someone having a hard time getting into episode 1.
It's a lot of setup.
I kind of got into it right away. I was sort of grooving with what it was doing, but I can understand that, it's a lot of setup. It's sort of very, temporally foreign, both from Victorian era and the 1980s, from where we are today. And it doesn't give us like a big cliffhanger or something to sort of really hang our hat on to want to know what happens next. Episode 2 does that, and it's the punch, and we get some like more interesting character drama with Fanny, and like, so I think if by episode 2 you're still not into it, episode 3 is still one of my favorites, but we've talked about how that's a slow one. It's like
it's at the bottom of my list.
Yeah, it's my number 3 spot, whereas previously it had been my number 2. But like, I think if you're not into it by episode 2, especially since you're not stuck in the theater for 9 hours, you can stop watching on Broadway HD. Give it till episode 2, see if you're invested by then. If you're not, no hard feelings. If it was live and like it's coming into town, would I tell people to see it? I would sort of modulate who I recommend to see it. Whereas I would say they give it 2 episodes to pretty much anyone. To commit to the 2-night big thing that's probably going to cost a lot of money, I would definitely really just.
Well, once again, use your discretion. Like, if you know it's somebody who is not a big theater person and saying you got to come for 2 separate shows,
but like I would say that
to go for. But if you know your family and it's like, hey, if I take you to this, you're like, you should hopefully enjoy it. It's a good story.
But like, I would unqualified tell anyone to go see Angels in America, both parts. Like, you might not be the biggest theater person, you might not be, but like, this is a fantastic play. Both parts are pretty great. Like, I would recommend it.
I don't know which one I would choose more. Like if you said you got to take somebody who's going to go see a 2-part play, what would you start? Like, what would you do? I think I would start with Nicholas Nickleby. And then if they got into the 2-part concept, then I would take them to see Angels in America, just because part 2 is a bit more less literal, more
I see
themey, motify, dream sequency.
I get what you mean by that. But my thinking is Angels in America is more on the pulse of the zeitgeist than Nicholas Nickleby. This is something that already felt antique in the 80s, kind of by design, but so I would have a hard time telling people like, yeah, you got to see this, and that'll see if you like 2-part plays. You might just not like 2-part plays, but Angels in America is an experience that I think everyone should be open to having. Yes. So yeah, overall, final appraisal, I enjoyed Nicholas Nickleby. There's a lot of hiccups. It is very stringy, very clumsy, but I would call it a bit of a beautiful mess at the end of the day.
One of these days, you and I will have to see if somebody is going to revive this play. You and I have to go try and experience it all in like one day at a theater versus episodic. Because I do think the episodic nature of our viewing did kind of cause us to do a stop and start routine, where if we were watching everything all the way through, we would maybe get a bit more of a fluid experience that we wouldn't be so hung up on certain elements like the Lily.
Personally, and this is just my speculation, it's hard to say having not seen it, I think I would dislike the stringy stuff even more if it was all together. I think the fact that we were treating it as individual episodic units of television, the fluff kind of justified that expansion and that division. Right. If we had binged this, even just like the film version, if we had binged it all in 2 days, I probably would have been like, this is too much. And I think that's how I would feel. I'm very open to seeing this it staged live and would love to be proven wrong, but I think they got away with a lot, in my opinion, by separating it this way. And for the most part, separating it on very clear plot lines between episodes, aside from episode 7, which was just bad in every way. So yeah, I enjoyed Nicholas Nickleby. If you've stuck with us, audience member,
good on you. We applaud you.
If you have somehow stuck with us this long without having watched Nicholas Nickleby yourself, I think you're probably already pretty on board. I would highly recommend you specifically doing so.
Yes, agreed. And I will say if you are a fan of this series, go and check out some of the other great versions of Nicholas Nickleby. There's the Charlie Hunnam version. I've just found there's one with Charles Dance as Ralph.
That's cool.
That was done in the early 2000s as well. So there's a few different ones that are out there that you can check out as well. This story has piqued your interest. Yeah. But for now, Ryan, we've been going on quite a bit for this final episode. I think
it's the finale, the big finale, big finish. It can be a little long, but yes, I say we should let these good people go. And if you've only been following us for Nicholas Nickleby, you never have to hear from us again. But if you're fans of us in the Cup, obviously there's many more episodes in store for you.
It's true. If you know a miniseries you want Ryan and I to tackle next, let us know.
Let's see how this does.
Yeah, agree.
Yeah, we can use a break.
We can definitely use a break. Either way, everybody, thank you so much for watching. Ryan, give us your classic Ryan Borochovitz send-off.
I'm not active on social media, so just follow Cup of Hemlock instead. How about you, Mac? Where can people find you?
Well, they can find and follow me at Mackenzie on all social media platforms. You also can follow my podcast, Before the Downbeat, a musical podcast, also on all social media platforms under that name. You can see what musicals we're up to. By the time this comes out, we will have wrapped season 3, and we will probably most likely be getting ready. If not, we are heading into season 4, which will feature our 50th episode.
Congrats, which is halfway to Les Mis.
It's true. We're halfway to Les Mis.
But Mac, do you even have anything left to say about Les Mis after all of these episodes?
So much. We haven't gotten into all the musical stuff that goes into that.
Okay, so
there's so much musical motifing and different.
So save that if you want to hear Mac talk more about that. Go to Before the Downbeat.
And who knows? Autumn may be able to get us a very special guest for that episode.
Ooh.
Yes, you never know.
Suspense. But you're only halfway there, so let's not get too excited.
It's true. Yes. We'll have our 50th episode in season 4, and then season 8 will be will feature our 100th episode, which will be the long-awaited promised Les Mis episode. That we've been building towards since episode 1. But either way, everybody, Thank you so much for watching. We will see you all on our next episode of The Cup. Bye.